Well, hello everyone. Today I will show you a demonstration of my blog post. The link is in the description of how you can set up fast kernel debugging via VMware VM. Now, why am I doing this? Well, there's a lot of information online about setting up an old-fashioned way of kernel debugging using the old WinDbg and the COM port. Unfortunately, the process is very difficult, and there's a lot of errors and a lot of mistakes you can make. Additionally, what I'm emphasizing here is the fast network connection. Now, I'm using this thing in a VM in the same host machine, so it should run really fast. Plus, I'm using this new version of WinDbg. And in this post, I will try to demonstrate from the beginning till the end how you can do this. Okay, so that out of the way, let's begin. So first of all, my setup. Now what you're looking at right now is my VM, and unfortunately I can't show you both systems, but if I make a screenshot, they will look like this. Now what I have here is a side-by-side view from my main computer. Now this is definitely not a requirement, but definitely a very handy thing. And what I'm talking about is having two screens. In my case, I have two monitors. The one on the right is showing the virtual machine or what I'm debugging, and on the left is the actual debugger. So again, if you can afford it and if you can have access to two screens, I would definitely recommend it. So what you do, and on the right, the virtual machine, you play it full screen and it will look like this. So again, I can't show you all of it, but that's pretty much what it is. So what you see on the screen here is this, okay? And what you don't see is the right side. So what I will be doing, I will be starting some of the programs on the right, and then I will move them to the on the left, I'm sorry, and I will move them to the right so you can actually see it, and then I will actually tell you that this part is the host, okay? So that out of the way, that's my setup. And before we begin, I have to give you some terminology. Now, this is really simple. The host, or host computer, or just host, is the main CPU that I'm running it on. I personally like desktops. Now, you can technically do it on the laptop. It's, possible, especially if it's a gaming laptop. Now, make sure that your CPU supports virtualization. Now, my blog post has the link that will let you test it. But make sure that this is the case, otherwise you won't be able to run any VM in your computer. Additionally, I like having some RAM. Now the reason being is that you will be running two operating systems at the same time in one machine. So 8 gigabyte in my experience was kind of like the minimum that you would need for Windows 10. I'm assuming if it's less, you'll have a lot of swapping and it's going to be pretty slow, but it might still work. Now, VM is a short term for virtual machine. Now, I will be using VMware Workstation. Now, I want to say it up front that I am not sponsored by VMware. I've just been using Workstation for quite some time, and I kind of like it. But if you prefer VirtualBox, which is free, you can technically do the same thing. Now, some steps for the setup of the network will be slightly different, just the Windows themselves. But I'm assuming the general concept should stay the same. Now, in the future, if there is some interest over it, I will record the same thing for VirtualBox, but for now it's just for VMware Workstation. Okay, so that's VM. Now, Guest, or just Guest OS, is the operating system that we are debugging. It's this one on the right in my case, or this blue one that you see in the background. Now, debugger, starting with ending with ER, this is the actual kernel debugger that will be running, this thing on the left in my case. And I will be using WMwg Preview, this new version, which unfortunately is still in the preview stage, but that's what we have today. Okay, and lastly, this kind of funny word is debug. EE at the end means something that we are debugging. And that is the operating system. Again, that's this thing on the right in my case, or the background here, that we will be debugging. Okay, and that's kind of like, I'll be using it interchangeably for the VM or the guest, but basically that's what debug is. Okay, well, additionally, I have to bring out some prerequisites. Now it can be all perfect. There are some limitations that apply to this method. Now first of all, the host. Your host PC ideally has to run Windows 10 Pro. It can be server or it can be enterprise. Now I haven't tried running it on the home version of Windows 10. Technically it should run, but I'm not sure. So again, I haven't done this. If you want to try, good luck. Now the thing that also can work is that WinDbg Preview can be installed on 8.1 and also on Windows 7. Now for that, I'm not going to explain it here. For that, read my blog and I will show you how to do that. Now obviously this is an undocumented way, so it might stop working in the future. So again, ideally you need Windows 10 Pro. Okay, now WMware has more limitations, and basically it has to be running Windows 10. It doesn't have to be Pro, server, or home. It has to be Windows 10. Now this limitation is hard-coded because of the debugging engine. I'll get back to it a little bit later. It can possibly be Windows 8.1, but not Windows 7. Unfortunately, Windows 7 is not supported for fast network debugging. If you need to do kernel debugging on Windows 7, you have to use COM port. So unfortunately, there's no way to bypass it. Okay, and the third limitation, on the most part, you will not be able to do debugging of physical hardware. You know, if you have a card that's connected to your actual host, you will not be able to do it this way, or even if you can, it will not be very reliable because you will have to be going through the virtualization in the VMware, and that is probably not the best way you want to debug your hardware. In that case, you will have to go old-fashioned way, do FireWire, but it has to be between two physical computers. Okay, so that out of the way, we can begin setting up your network here. Now, the most important part, obviously, since this is called fast network connection, we have to set up connection between the OS and the host. Now, before we begin, one very important step to make is to make a screenshot. Now, the screenshot is VMware way of calling, I'm sorry, not a screenshot, a snapshot. You see, like this little pop-up helps me. So if you go into Snapshot Manager and click Take Snapshot, I usually give them the date. Like in my case, you see the fresh install of the operating system, and then I made one today. But make sure to do this before you actually proceed. The reason being, and this is important, there are quite a few steps that you have to go through, and if you make a mistake or if you mess something up, it's not really easy to undo it. So in this case, reverting to a snapshot is very, very easy. To make sure to make this thing, it will take some disk space, but it's not that much. So in my case, I have it already, so I'm not going to do it again. And now we can begin. Okay, so like I told you, we have to do the basic setup of the network. So while my guest is still active, if I go into Workstation VM and then Settings and go into Network Adapter, I personally prefer using a simple setup with just a NAT, which is used to share between the host and the guest. Now, the only drawback of this setup is if you are doing some malware research on your guest, you might want to use some kind of a custom virtual network, because again, you don't want to share it. But in my case, I'm just studying the kernel here. There is no malware. That's why I'm using this setup. So this thing is important to make sure that you can communicate between the guest and the host. Okay, now then, just to explain what we will be doing, I have this diagram for you. Now, I apologize for my drawing skills. So basically, the black rectangle here is kind of like representing your host PC. Then you have your host operating system, this gray one on the left. Again, just to match my picture here, my screenshot of my actual setup. And on the right, you have your guest VM, which is your guest Windows 10. Now, the way this kernel debugging session is established or is held is that on the left in the host OS, we have WinDbg Preview that's providing user interface here, and also there is a hidden debugging engine that's running inside. Now, on the guest side, we also have to connect to something, and that something becomes kernel debugging engine. Now, this is a part of the kernel code itself. It is present in every OS, Windows 10, and I'm assuming Windows 8 as well. And it is there by default. Now, by default, it is not activated, so we'll have to activate it later. But this is how debugging is done. So then we're using faster UDP connection between them that goes back and forth. And it is done, in our case, via virtual network, which makes it fast. Okay, now originally when you see the setup, your first thought would be to set up a static IP for both computers, right? Or at least for the debuggee operating system, so that you don't have to deal with the dynamic IPs. So you would go into let's see, control panel, right? So you will go into network. You would go to the properties of your network, you would pull up IPv4, right? And you would try to set up your static IP DNS here. That's what I did, and that's what really set me back for a few hours to figure this out. Well, the problem is, let me show you my diagram back. If you look at this thing, well, what we're doing here, this little blue rectangle, which is basically a part of the kernel that is providing debugging engine. Well, we have to be able to connect to the kernel at the very early stage, right when the system boots up. So it's like literally just like at the very, very early boot stage. So this connection has to originate way before the driver, the network driver that's establishing the static IP here, even has a chance to load. So this is important to understand, because basically what this means is that the IP stack that this kernel debugging engine code maintains has nothing to do with this, with the IP stack of the actual network driver that loads way, way after, at a much later stage. So in other words, they do not overlap. Now, from what I understand, the kernel debugging engine supports a hard-coded IP range that I just highlighted. Now, if your host is sitting on this range, you should not have a problem. In my case, I don't. So to make things simple, to be able to communicate from the debuggee to the host, I decided to go a little bit different route. I decided to set up the host to be discoverable by the computer name. In this case, I don't have to worry about which IP the host has for this connection, for the bottom line. Now, the top one is also pretty easy to bypass by not specifying IP address from the WinDbg itself, and I'll return to it later. Okay, so by using host name instead of IP, we will remove ourselves from this dilemma of setting up the actual static IP. So, and that's what we will do right now. Again, don't try to set it up here in the guest. It will just set you back and you'll lose a lot of time. Okay, so at this point, we need to make the host computer discoverable on your local network. By default, it is not. So what you need to do on the host, now I can't show you the host right now, but I'm going to show you where you need to click. On the host, you right-click on your network icon, whatever that is, and you go to network and let's see, what did it say? Open network and internet settings. Okay, that's what you do on the host. So let me do it right now. Okay, this is from my host. It's not a VM. Okay, let me get my bearing. Okay, so you go to Network and Sharing Center, and you click on Change Advanced Settings, Sharing Settings. Okay, that's where you need to be. Again, on the host. Then you need guest or public network profile, and you need to turn on network discovery on this computer. Now, this is important. When you do this, make sure to save changes and reboot host. Only after you do this, your host PC will be discoverable on your local network. So this is important. So I've already done that, so I don't need to do that. So when that is done, you need to make sure that you can ping host from the guest. In other words, this bottom connection. Okay, but before we actually ping anything, we need to allow pinging. Now, unfortunately, Windows 10 really tightens up all the screws here. So bring up command line, make sure to run it as administrator. Now you have to do this on both the guest and the host. Right now I'm doing the guest. So just as a shortcut to bring up firewall, you do wf.msc, run it as administrator. Make sure to enlarge it. Okay, so what we need to do, we go to inbound rules, make sure to sort it by name. And what we're looking for is file and printer sharing. So you have to scroll down and you'll see probably about 4 of them. Then make sure to expand profile. And what we're looking for is file and printer sharing, echo request, ICMP version 4 in. And what you need is for private and public profile. Make sure that you pick the right one. Okay, and then you enable it. Right click, enable rule. Here you go. So at this point you're done with the guest. So right now you should be able to ping guest from the host, but we need to do the same on the host. So let me start. You don't see it, it's off the screen, but basically what I'm doing, I'm running a command line as administrator, and then I do the same thing on the host. Again, I have to do it on both ends of the pipe. Okay, this is from the host, inbound rule, and go to file and printer sharing. As you can see, again, make sure to pick the right one. You need private and public for in, make sure it's in ICMP v4 and it's enabled, because you know I did this already. If it's not, make sure to right click and enable it. Okay, in this case we should be able to ping in both directions. Okay, so now we need to make sure that we can actually ping our host computer. Again, we need to do this bottom line. We need to ping a host computer by its name. Okay, the name is important. So how do you get the host computer name? Well, you probably know the whoami command, right? So when you do whoami on the host, in this case host PC1 before the slash is the name of the host. Okay, and then you go to the guest command line, you do ping, make sure to specify version 4, because again WinDbg uses the IPv4, and specify the host name here. And what's important is that you have to be able to ping it through. Now I'm not going to show you my actual host name right now, but I will show you that you can actually ping it. So if you do command, and we do ping version 4, which is important, and do host name. As you can see, it can ping. So this is important. So once that is done, you are good to go on this stage. Okay, so the next thing that you need to do is set up your guest OS. Now, all this information will be in my blog, and I'll try to post it in the description. So what you basically need are these 2 files. Now they're different depending on your operating system or the bitness of your guest. Well, you probably know how to tell. If you go into computer, right click on this PC, go into properties, and it should tell you right here. You see, in my case it's a 64-bit operating system. So for the guest I will need these 2 files. Now, I don't know any way of just downloading them. The only way to get them that I know of is by downloading and installing this whole SDK. Now, this link will be in my blog, so make sure to go here, make sure it's Microsoft and not some other site. And well, let's download it right now. Just close all of this stuff. So again, you need Windows 10 SDK, download the installer, run it. Now this part should not take that long. And when the installer comes up, you need to install it, just like usual location. And no, we don't need any tracking. I accept that. Okay, now this part, make sure to remove all the check marks except Windows debugging tools, because you do not want to download like 5 or whatever, 8 gigabytes of stuff. Still, there's 450 megabytes of stuff that you have to download just to get these 2 files. I know it's kind of ridiculous, but there is no way to get them. Once you do that download, you can just copy them from one virtual machine to another. At this point, we have nothing else to do but just to install it. So now to make things fast, let me pause this thing and I'll stop when it's all done. Okay, well, it takes about a minute to download this thing, so it doesn't take long. So now, as I showed you before, we need these files. So as you see, they're all in the same folder. So what we need to do, we need to run our command prompt as administrator, and we need to change directory into it. Okay, so at this stage, we will be setting up our debugging environment in the VM. Obviously, I'm doing this in the VM. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you. Now, the first thing you need to do is you need to run kdnet in this folder. And what you're looking for is this line. Now, since we're doing this in the VM has a virtual network that probably will be the same in your case. But what is important is that this command, this kdnet, is telling you that this network card, as it thinks, is compatible. So if you see this line, it's a good sign. So the next step that you need to do is actually do the kdnet setup. So let me show you the command. It's kind of simple. Now, what it will be originally is that after you run kdnet, you will have to set up your actual connection to the host. And the way you do this is kdnet, then the host name, that same host name that you found out before. In this case, it's host PC1. So you provide it here, and then you pick the port. Now the port number, it can't be just any like port you want to. It has to be in this range. Now, I just happened to pick 5030. I don't know, just a number I liked. I'm sorry, 50,030. But your port number has to be only within this range. So don't just try to set up some arbitrary number, because it's not going to work if it's not in this range. Okay. So, and what you need to do is basically run this command in your guest. Okay, so again, I will use my actual host name here, and I will choose 50,030. Okay, and so what you're looking for is that you get this line over here. So what I would do, I would copy it and paste it somewhere in your host. Now, what you got here, obviously that's the port that we specified, and also the key. So overall, this is your connection string from the host to this guest VM. Now, technically, you can specify your own key, so you don't have to deal with this large, auto-generated key. But I'm not going to delve into it here, so if you want to check my blog post, it will show you how to do this. Now, one thing I need to point out here is that if your guest VM is accessible from the internet, I don't know your setup, but just in case it is, make sure to treat this key as a password, because if somebody has this key, they will be able to connect to your guest VM and access pretty much anything in it through the kernel debugger. So again, make sure to treat it seriously if that's the case. Okay, so make sure to get it, because again, it won't show you again. So save it on the host, make sure to save it. And at this point, we are done with the setup of our network. One thing that we need to double check is to ping our guest from the VM. If you remember, we did the bottom ping here, but we didn't do the top ping. In other words, that we can ping our guest from the host. Now, the reason I'm doing this is just to be sure that there is no like firewall or anything else blocking it. And this is also important. So what you do, at this point, we need to get dynamic IP of your guest VM. So you just do ipconfig. And in this case, the IP that guest VM here is this. So then you run command line on the host. So again, the blue one is from the host. You do ping, again, version 4, and then IP from the host. And make sure that we have a fast response here. You see, like it worked really fast and the ping worked. So at this point, we just tested that both of these connections work. Now, in our case, we can ping here like we just did, and before we were able to ping our host using the host name. So at this point, we are ready to go to the next stage. Well, the next stage is actually downloading WinDbg Preview. Now, obviously, you do this on the host, but since you don't see the host, let me show you it from the guest. Again, you do this from the host. You do WinDbg Preview in your favorite search engine. And what you're looking for is the website that says Microsoft.com. Obviously, don't download it from anywhere else. Okay, now go away. Okay, Microsoft.com, as you can see, it's the store app. And you have to click get. Unfortunately, they will force you to provide Microsoft account here. You can just download it, but you know, create a fake one or whatever. Just make sure to install it. It installs really quickly. It's not an MSI. It's very nice, you know, slick installer. And when it is all installed, again on the host, it will look like this. Now, this is the new look of WinDbg Preview, and as you can see, it's a little bit different from the old look. It has windows and buttons and all this stuff. So I personally don't like this layout. So let me start it from my host system. So this is actual WinDbg Preview that's running on my host, and as you can see, I modified this layout a little bit. I personally like seeing this assembly window as its own window, registers, memory, stack, breakpoints, you know, all of them at the same time. Now, some people prefer doing it through a command window, which you still need, but I don't. That's why I kind of relegated it into this little side view here. Okay, so this is your WinDbg. Again, you run it on the host. Okay, well, at this point, one important thing that I need to tell you, and by the way, guys, if you need to do the setup, unfortunately, I can't save my layout in WinDbg. I couldn't find it, so you'll just have to go into View and click these buttons, and it will pop up these windows and just move them around. So, and just, you know, relocate them to the new spot that you feel fit, and WinDbg will remember it. Okay, so now important point. At some time when you first run WinDbg, I'm not sure, it might be when you first run or when you try to attach to the kernel, you will see a window from the Windows firewall like this. Now, important thing to note is that this pop-up will happen only once, so make sure to set it up correctly. What you need to do, you need to make sure that this is obviously coming from Windows debugging engine. This is from WinDbg. It will have this weird long string, but it basically is the path to the Windows app, store app. What is important is that you check both of these checkboxes. Now, originally, I think initially it will have only one of them. And if you just click away, just like, oh, like go away, that would be a bad thing to do, because this thing will not pop up again. And if you don't check both of them, you will have a problem with the connection. To fix this, you will have to go to Windows Firewall and locate these things, which unfortunately is quite cumbersome because it doesn't just translate to two settings. There's a whole bunch of them. So make sure to click both of them and then allow access. Now, this has to be done only once on the host. Okay? So when you actually are done with that setup, we are ready to connect to to the VM. Now, because I tried connecting before, it has this little, thing which says that, hey, I connected already. In our case, we were going to start a new connection. So what you go is to attach the kernel. Now, originally, all of this stuff will be empty. And then you go back to your scratch pad. Remember that stuff we saved that from running kdnet on the guest, and that's what we are going to be using. So 50,030, and then the key. Make sure to copy and paste. Obviously, don't try to type it. Make sure to copy all of it and put it into key. Now, originally, this box here requires IP address of the target. Or in other words, if you bring up our diagram, it asks for IP address of your guest VM. Well, what I've discovered is that you can actually leave it blank. In this case, any guest that matches this key, and by the way, this key, when you set it up, it will be totally random. So the next time you do it, it will be totally different. So the connection will go through only if, from the VM, only if this key matches. So this is pretty much guaranteed that you will have a one-to-one connection here. Okay? And now the last setting, initial break, this will allow us to break into the guest operating system when it's loading. So I'm going to check this, and then you click OK. So we can get rid of this. Obviously, don't delete it, just close it. Okay, and now our WinDbg Preview is ready to connect. Now, at this stage, a lot of people see this message that it's waiting to reconnect, and they're not really sure what's going on. They try to click things in the VM, and it doesn't work. I've been there myself. Now, what the WinDbg is doing here is it's waiting for you to restart the guest VM. Okay, now don't do anything, just leave it running on your host and restart your guest. So let me do it right now. Let me move it out of the way. And we do restart, and I'm going to kind of overlay them and show you what happens. So watch here. Ideally, if connection is established at the boot time, you will see diagnostic messages here. So here you go. As you can see, because we have this go button that's highlighted, we actually broke into the guest. As you can see, the guest is frozen, and we are at the initial boot sequence. So if you see this here in the command window, it means you are golden. So your connection has succeeded. Now let me expand it a little bit. Okay, so now we are in the kernel. Now, I think I mentioned in the beginning the word preview in WinDbg. And what this means is that there is a lot of bugs in it. Now, you're looking at two of them right now. For instance, we are not at address 0. So, and this is not where we are in our disassembly. It's one bug. The second bug, as you can see, it failed to load our registers. Now, in my blog, I have troubleshooting section at the bottom that kind of shows you how to bypass all these things and kind of resolve them. So please refer to it, but kind of to show you quickly to reload, to make sure that disassembly is actually showing some code. Make sure to step into it a couple times, and here you go. We are showing the disassembly. Now with the registers, it's a little bit different story. So at this point, we're not going to worry about this. But what is important is that, as you can see, we can now navigate. Now, just to show you why I like this fast networking connection and why I'm calling it that. Now, if you've ever done COM port debugging, you will know how slow things are. Now, watch this disassembly window as I try to step into it. You see how quickly I can do that? This is like nothing. It's almost like if I'm doing it, through a user mode debugger. This is very, very cool how quickly I can navigate through this stuff. Okay, well, so let's let the guest continue loading. Now this might be another bug. For some reason it breaks twice. I'm not sure if that's something that's a problem, or again, I don't know, so I have to go it twice. And now, as you can see, it's loading. So let's wait for the operating system to load up. And technically it should go through a normal boot stage, and if something happens, you will see the debugger actually, the buttons light up, but it didn't. So right now we're at in our guest, so let me log in. What you can see right now, the new thing is that we are in the test mode. You see that at the bottom right, it basically tells you that the operating system is in the debugging stage. And just to show you that we are breaking into it, I'm going to bring up the time and overlay it with our debugger. Okay, so to break into the operating system, into the guest, all you can do is just hit break. As you can see, the time froze up and we are in the kernel. So at this point, it's not interesting to stare at the guest because it's all frozen. You won't be able to interact with it. So let me expand the window. Now, the first thing you would want to do, again, this is not a tutorial for kernel debugging. If there is some interest, I'll do it later. But basically, at this point, you would want to load all the symbols. Let's see. Well, speaking of bugs, it doesn't always work. Let me try again. Okay. Well, let's resolve one thing at a time. Now, the registers. I definitely think that this is a bug in WinDbg, the way it shows them like this originally. In my view, you would have to go the operating system itself and then break into it again. Sometimes it takes twice to do that. Let's see if that works. Okay. I'm not sure what is causing it. Sometimes just kind of letting it run for a little bit would refresh something. Since it's a bug, again, I don't know. There's no rhyme or reason. Let me try the third time. It might be a charm, but it is not. Okay, well, let me try to load symbols again. And that is not working either. So let me try to do one more time and step out of here. Well, let's see if I try to resolve some symbols. Let's see, ps get current process. Because what we haven't done, we haven't really loaded our symbols yet. So now, at this point, I'm just trying to resolve this bug with missing registers, but obviously you can't access them using command line. It's not as convenient. But right now, let me just put a breakpoint on this line here, and let's see if that will help. Okay, and it did. For some reason, when you break using the break command, it doesn't like loading registers. So probably bug, but what I'm usually doing, I set my own breakpoint like I did here on this function, and then it will load them up. Now, another bug, which is really annoying UI bug, is that this column that says value, for some reason originally, is not expanded enough. You see, you might be looking at this like, that's an interesting value. Is there something else here? Well, guess what? Yes, there is. So yeah, make sure to expand it like this. I'm sure they will fix it at some point, but right now, yeah, you get this really annoying thing. As you can see, it has all the registers. They're kind of like weirdly laid out, all of them with all their, minor parts. And also you have kernel and SIMD registers. So again, this is not a tutorial on debugging, but as you can see, the main point is that you can pretty easily navigate through the kernel. You see, it's pretty fast and it's kind of usable. So obviously there is a memory window which is not very friendly. You can't like edit anything here, and it's kind of hard to scroll. You might not see symbols. So at this point you might be able to reload, and here you go. So for some reason, like I showed before, I wasn't able to load symbols, but now I was able to. Again, possibly a bug, but as you can see, I have the call stack. I can navigate through it. Oops, sorry, I think it's a double click. Yep. So yeah, that's basically it, guys. So this is how you set up kernel debugging. Obviously, I understand that you will have a lot of issues doing all this stuff, and my main advice to you, okay, now before we go to the main advice, refer to the blog. I have at the end, I have some troubleshooting steps that I've encountered and how I was able to bypass them. If not, you know, you can ask, and I'll be able to help you as much as I can. But the main suggestion I would give you, in case you run into an issue, if you try to connect and basically you get stuck on this waiting to connect message, even if you boot your guest OS and nothing happens, it means that something is not pinging through. Now, I would definitely disable your antivirus, or if you're obviously doing kernel debugging, you probably know how to not get malware, so you probably shouldn't even run antivirus. Make sure to remove it. Now, whatever that's built into Windows, Windows Defender, it doesn't seem to be causing any problems, but any third-party antivirus definitely would be something that I would consider disabling, because it puts its roots deep into the operating system, so you don't want to fight with that thing. And yeah, just make a screenshot, like I said in the beginning, or snapshot, whatever the VMware people call them. And yeah, so if you run into a problem, first of all, let me show you what you would do. Let me remove the breakpoint. So right now I released the operating system. So if you run into the problem, most certainly it's the network connection. So since you've made your snapshot, go into Snapshot Manager and simply revert to the beginning. And then go back to my blog post or to this video and just repeat it step by step. I know it's kind of tedious, but that's what worked for me, and it's repeatable. Okay, so at this point, I think you should be good to go with kernel debugging. And thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.